The woman collapsed at the edge of Zachary Lawson's campfire, just as the first snowflakes began to fall from the November sky, her lips blue and her eyes wild with fever. He dropped the tin cup he had been holding, coffee spilling into the dirt as he rushed toward her crumpled form, his heart hammering against his ribs. She wore nothing but a torn calico dress, soaked through and frozen stiff in places, her bare feet bleeding onto the rocky ground. He knelt beside her, pressing 2 fingers against her throat, and felt the faint, irregular pulse beneath skin that felt like ice. "Jesus," he muttered, already stripping off his heavy coat and wrapping it around her trembling shoulders. Her teeth chattered so violently he could hear them clicking together, and when her eyes rolled toward him, he saw nothing but confusion and terror in their depths. "Please," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Please, they are coming." He glanced toward the darkening horizon, seeing nothing but the vast expanse of Arizona territory stretching endlessly in all directions. His camp sat in a small depression between rocky outcroppings about 15 miles south of Vulture City, Arizona, where he had been working a claim for the past 6 months. It was 1881, late November, and the weather had turned brutally cold in the high desert. He had seen men die from exposure in less than an hour during nights like this. "Nobody is coming," he said, trying to keep his voice calm and steady. "You are safe now. Can you tell me your name?" Her eyes fluttered closed, and for a terrible moment he thought she had died right there in his arms. Then her chest rose with a shallow, rasping breath, and he lifted her without hesitation, carrying her closer to the fire. She weighed almost nothing, her body slight and fragile in his grip. He laid her on his bedroll near the flames and began working quickly, his mind racing through everything he knew about treating hypothermia and fever. He had seen this before, years ago, when his younger sister had fallen through the ice of a frozen pond back in Missouri. The doctor had told him then that the key was to warm the person slowly, not too quickly, or their heart might give out. He built up the fire, adding more wood until the flames leaped high into the gathering darkness. Then he pulled his spare blankets from his pack and began layering them over her shaking form. Her dress was still soaking wet, and he knew it had to come off or she would never get warm. He hesitated, his natural sense of propriety warring with the urgent need to save her life. Propriety lost. He turned his back while he undid the buttons with numb fingers, trying to preserve what dignity he could, then stripped the frozen fabric away and replaced it immediately with his own spare shirt and long underwear, both far too large for her but warm and dry. Only when she was dressed and wrapped in every blanket he owned did he allow himself to truly look at her face. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with dark auburn hair that fell in tangled, matted waves around her shoulders. Her face was thin, with high cheekbones and a scattering of freckles across her nose. Even pale and half frozen, she was beautiful in a way that made his chest tighten. "What happened to you?" he asked softly, though she was too far gone to answer. Her eyes had closed again, and her breathing came in short, sharp gasps that worried him more with each passing moment. He filled his kettle with water from his canteen and set it over the fire to heat, then rummaged through his supplies for anything that might help. He had whiskey, which might warm her from the inside, and some dried herbs his mother had taught him to use for fevers. It was not much, but it would have to do. While the water heated, he sat beside her and took one of her hands in his, rubbing it gently between his palms to encourage circulation. Her fingers were stick-thin and covered in cuts and scrapes, the nails broken and dirty. She had been running, he realized, running hard and for a long time through rough country. "Who were you running from?" he asked the darkness. The only answer was the wind picking up, howling through the rocks and sending sparks from the fire spiraling up into the night. The snow was falling harder now, fat white flakes that melted as soon as they hit the warm ground near the fire but accumulated quickly beyond its circle of light. If this kept up, they would be snowed in by morning. When the water boiled, he mixed in some of the herbs and a generous splash of whiskey, then let it cool until it was just warm enough to drink. He lifted her head carefully, supporting it in the crook of his arm, and brought the cup to her lips. "Come on now," he urged. "You need to drink this, just a little." Her lips parted slightly, and he managed to get a few drops into her mouth. She coughed, sputtering, but some of it went down. He tried again, patient and persistent, until she had swallowed perhaps a quarter of the cup. It was not much, but it was something. He settled her back onto the bedroll and checked her pulse again. Still weak, still irregular, but maybe a fraction stronger than before. Or maybe he was just hoping. He added more wood to the fire and positioned himself between her and the wind, using his own body as an additional shield against the cold. The night stretched long and terrible before him. Every few minutes he checked her breathing, felt her forehead for signs of fever, made sure she was still wrapped tight in the blankets. Her skin was warming, but slowly, and the fever seemed to be getting worse rather than better. She began to mumble in her sleep incoherent words that tumbled out in a frantic stream. "No," she whispered. "No, please, I will not go back. You cannot make me." "You are safe," Zachary repeated, though he was not sure she could hear him. "Nobody is going to hurt you." "Henry," she gasped, and her whole body tensed. "Henry, please do not do this." The name meant nothing to Zachary, but the terror in her voice when she said it made his jaw tighten. Whoever Henry was, he was the reason she had been running through the desert in the middle of winter with nothing but a thin dress. Around midnight, her fever spiked dangerously high. Her skin burned to the touch, and she began thrashing in the blankets, fighting invisible demons. Zachary held her shoulders gently, trying to keep her from hurting herself, while his mind raced through options. He had nothing for a fever this high except cold water and hope. He soaked a cloth in the last of his drinking water and laid it across her forehead, then stripped away some of the blankets to keep her from overheating. It was a delicate balance, trying to warm her frozen body while not letting the fever cook her brain. He had never felt so helpless in his life. "Stay with me," he said, his voice rough. "I did not haul you in from the cold just to have you die on me now. You hear me? You stay with me." Whether his words reached her or not, he could not say, but sometime around dawn her fever broke. The terrible heat in her skin faded to something more manageable, and her breathing eased into a deeper, more natural rhythm. She stopped thrashing and fell into what looked like real sleep. Zachary slumped back against his saddle, exhausted beyond measure. He had not slept at all, had spent the entire night in a state of frantic vigilance, and now that the immediate crisis seemed to have passed, the fatigue hit him like a physical blow. But he could not sleep yet. The snow had piled up 6 inches deep around the camp, and more was still falling. He needed to rig some kind of shelter, or they would both freeze. Working quickly in the gray pre-dawn light, he strung a canvas tarp between 2 of the larger rocks, creating a lean-to that would keep the worst of the snow off them. He moved their bedding and supplies underneath it, then rebuilt the fire at the entrance where it would provide heat without filling their shelter with smoke. It was crude, but it would work. Only when everything was secure did he finally allow himself to rest. He sat down beside the woman, his back against the rock wall, and closed his eyes for just a moment. Sleep took him before he could even think about resisting. He woke hours later to find her watching him with clear, alert eyes the color of summer grass. The confusion and fever were gone, replaced by a wary intelligence that assessed him carefully. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse but steady. "Zachary Lawson," he said, sitting up straighter and trying to ignore the way his back protested. "You stumbled into my camp last night, half frozen and delirious. How are you feeling?" She considered the question, moving her limbs experimentally beneath the blankets. "Cold, sore, alive, which is more than I expected." Her gaze moved to the snow falling beyond their shelter. "How long was I unconscious?" "About 8 hours. You had a bad fever that broke around sunrise." He reached for his canteen, which he had refilled with melted snow, and offered it to her. "You should drink something." She took the canteen with trembling hands and drank deeply, water spilling down her chin. When she lowered it, she met his eyes directly. "Thank you. You saved my life." "You are welcome. Now do you want to tell me what you were running from?" Her expression shuddered immediately, all that openness vanishing behind a wall of caution. "It is better if you do not know, safer for you." "Little late for that," Zachary said dryly. "You made it my business when you collapsed in my camp. If somebody is coming after you, I need to know." She looked away, her jaw working as she struggled with some internal debate. Finally, she said, "My name is Alina Thompson. I am running from my husband." The word husband hit Zachary like a punch to the gut, though he could not say exactly why. He had no claim on this woman, had known her less than a day, but something in him recoiled at the idea of her belonging to someone else. He pushed the feeling aside and focused on the practical. "Why?" he asked simply. Alina was quiet for a long moment, her fingers plucking at the edge of the blanket. When she spoke, her voice was flat, emotionless, as if she was reciting facts about someone else's life. "I was sold to Henry Thompson 3 years ago by my father to settle a gambling debt. Henry is a wealthy man, owns a ranch about 40 miles north of here. On the outside, he is respectable, a pillar of the community, but in private, he is a monster." She pulled back the blanket slightly, revealing bruises on her wrists in the distinct shape of fingerprints. "He likes to hurt me. Has from the beginning. I tried to endure it, tried to be a good wife, but 2 weeks ago he told me he was tired of me, that he was going to kill me and make it look like an accident so he could marry someone younger and prettier." Zachary felt rage building in his chest, hot and fierce. "Did you go to the law?" Alina laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. "The sheriff is Henry's brother-in-law. Half the town owes him money. Nobody would help me. So I waited until he went to Phoenix on business and I ran. I took a horse and headed south, planning to reach Tucson and get on a train east. But the horse spooked and threw me 2 days ago, ran off with all my supplies. I have been walking ever since, trying to stay ahead of him. He is following you. He will be by now. He was supposed to return yesterday. When he finds me gone, he will come after me. Henry does not like losing what he considers his property." She met his eyes again, and this time he saw the full depth of her fear. "You should leave me here and go. Put as much distance between us as you can. When he finds me, he will kill anyone who helped me." Zachary was already shaking his head before she finished speaking. "I am not leaving you. You do not understand what kind of man he is. I understand just fine, and I am still not leaving you." He said it with absolute finality, the decision already made. "You are in no condition to travel, and even if you were, you would not make it 10 miles in this snow. So we are going to wait out this storm, get you healthy enough to ride, and then we are going to figure out how to get you somewhere safe." Alina stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." It was a fair question, and Zachary was not entirely sure he had a good answer. Something about this woman called to him on a level he did not fully understand. Maybe it was the courage it must have taken to run with nothing but the clothes on her back. Maybe it was the way she had fought so hard to survive. Or maybe it was something simpler and more profound, a recognition that passed between them in that moment that defied explanation. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said finally. "And because nobody deserves to live in fear like that." Tears welled in Alina's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "You are either the bravest man I have ever met or the most foolish." "Probably both," Zachary admitted with a slight smile. "Now, when is the last time you ate something?" She had to think about it. 2 days ago, maybe 3. "Before the horse threw me." He dug through his supplies and came up with a tin of beans and some hardtack. It was not much, but it would put something in her stomach. He heated the beans over the fire and watched while she ate, noting the way her hands shook and how she had to force herself to go slowly instead of wolfing everything down. When she was finished, she handed the tin back to him with a murmured thanks and settled back against the blankets. The simple act of eating seemed to have exhausted her. "You should rest," Zachary said. "Get your strength back. What about you? You must be tired too." He was, desperately, but someone needed to keep watch. "I will sleep later. For now, just focus on getting better." She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded and closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into sleep. Zachary sat watching her, his mind turning over everything she had told him. Henry Thompson. He thought he might have heard the name before, mentioned in passing in one of Vulture City's saloons. A rancher with money and influence, the kind of man who thought he could do whatever he pleased because he had never faced real consequences. The kind of man Zachary hated on principle. He had grown up poor in Missouri, the son of a farmer who had lost everything when the bank foreclosed on their land. He had watched his father break under the weight of that loss, had seen how the wealthy and powerful could crush ordinary people without a second thought. It had instilled in him a deep and abiding hatred of injustice, and a determination never to stand by while someone abused their power, which was why, despite the very real danger Alina had warned him about, he had no intention of abandoning her. If Henry Thompson wanted to come after her, he would have to go through Zachary first. The snow continued falling throughout the day, turning the world into a uniform expanse of white. Zachary kept the fire going and periodically checked on Alina, making sure her fever stayed down and she was warm enough. She slept deeply, the kind of exhausted sleep that came after days of fear and flight. Late in the afternoon, she woke again, more clear-headed than before. Zachary gave her more water and the last of the beans, and they sat together in companionable silence while the wind howled outside their shelter. "Tell me about yourself," Alina said eventually. "It seems only fair, since you know my sorry story." Zachary shrugged. "Not much to tell. I am 26 years old, originally from Missouri. My family lost their farm when I was 15, and I have been drifting west ever since, taking work where I can find it. Been prospecting this claim for 6 months now, but it is not paying out like I hoped." "Do you have family still?" "A mother and 2 sisters back in St. Louis. I send them money when I can." He stirred the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise. "My father died 5 years ago, drank himself to death after we lost the farm." Alina's expression softened. "I am sorry. It was a long time ago." He looked at her directly. "What about you? Any family besides your father?" Her face hardened. "No, my mother died when I was 12. It was just me and my father after that, and he made it clear I was nothing but a burden. When Henry offered to take me off his hands, he could not sign the papers fast enough. You ever think about going back east, starting over somewhere he could not find you?" "Every day," she admitted. "But I have no money, no skills beyond what I learned running Henry's household." "How would I survive?" "You survived 2 days in the desert with nothing," Zachary pointed out. That is more than most people could do. You are stronger than you think." She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "You have a lot of faith in someone you just met." "I have good instincts about people." They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that did not need to be filled with empty words. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside their small shelter, with the fire crackling and the warmth of shared blankets, there was a strange sense of peace. As night fell again, Alina's fever returned, though not as severely as before. Zachary bathed her face with cool water and made her drink more of the herbal tea, his movements gentle and careful. She was lucid this time, watching him with those green eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked softly. He did not have a good answer for that, not one he could put into words, so instead he said, "Try to sleep. You need your rest." She caught his hand as he started to pull away, her fingers cold against his skin. "Zachary, thank you for everything." The way she said his name did something strange to his heart. He squeezed her hand gently, then released it and settled back against the rock wall, keeping watch through the long night ahead. By morning of the second day, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed. Snow covered everything in a blanket of white that sparkled in the bright sunlight, beautiful and deadly. The temperature had dropped even further overnight, and Zachary knew they were in serious trouble if they could not get moving soon. Alina was better, her fever gone completely and some color returning to her face. She was able to sit up on her own and eat the meager breakfast he prepared without assistance. But she was still weak, her body depleted from days of running and exposure. "How far to the nearest town?" she asked, pulling one of his blankets more tightly around her shoulders. "Vulture City is about 15 miles north, but we cannot go there. If your husband is looking for you, that is the first place he will check." Zachary considered their options. "There is a small settlement about 20 miles south, close to the Mexican border. We could make for that, try to find you passage on a stage or a freight wagon heading east." 20 miles through snow in the middle of winter," Alina said, her voice doubtful. "Can we make it?" "We do not have much choice. My supplies are running low and we cannot stay here indefinitely." He looked at her seriously. "Are you strong enough to ride?" "I will have to be." He spent the rest of the morning preparing for the journey. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Duke, had weathered the storm well, sheltered among the rocks where Zachary had picketed him. He saddled the horse carefully, then helped Alina to her feet. She swayed, grabbing his arm for support, and he saw her jaw clench with determination as she fought to stay upright. She was wearing his spare clothes still, the shirt and pants comically oversized on her slight frame, but at least they were warm. He had fashioned makeshift boots for her out of canvas and leather scraps, tied around her feet with cord. They would not last long, but they were better than nothing. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, though he could see the fear in her eyes. Fear of the journey ahead, fear of being caught, fear of what would happen if Henry Thompson found them. But beneath the fear was something harder, more determined. She had come this far. She was not going to give up now. Zachary mounted Duke first, then reached down to pull Alina up behind him. She settled against his back, her arms wrapping around his waist to hold on, and he tried very hard not to notice how right it felt to have her there. They set out heading south, Duke picking his way carefully through the snow-covered terrain. The going was slow, the deep drifts making every step treacherous, but the horse was sure-footed and patient. Behind him, Alina held on tight, her face pressed against his shoulder. They had gone perhaps 5 miles when Duke's ears suddenly pricked forward, his whole body tensing. Zachary felt it too, that prickling awareness that something was wrong. He reined the horse to a stop and listened, straining to hear over the sound of wind and his own heartbeat. There, the distant sound of hoofbeats coming from the north. "Someone is coming," Elena whispered, her arms tightening around him. Zachary looked around quickly, assessing their options. The terrain here was relatively open, offering little cover. There was a small grove of trees about a quarter-mile to the west, but they would never make it without being seen. The hoofbeats were getting louder. "Hold on," he said tersely, and urged Duke into a trot toward the only cover available, a jumble of large boulders off to the side of their path. They reached it just as 3 riders crested the rise behind them. Zachary dismounted quickly and helped Elena down, then led Duke behind the rocks where they would be out of sight. He pressed his finger to his lips, signaling her to stay quiet, and peered carefully around the edge of the boulder. The 3 riders were still a good distance away, but they were definitely following their trail. Even from here, Zachary could see they were well armed, rifles prominent in their saddle scabbards. They had the look of men who knew how to use them. "Can you see who they are?" Elena breathed, so close her lips almost touched his ear. "Too far to tell." He watched as the riders stopped where Zachary and Elena had paused moments before, leaning down from their saddles to examine the tracks in the snow. After a brief consultation, they continued forward, following the trail directly toward the rocks where Zachary and Elena were hiding. "We need to move," Zachary said quietly. "Stay low and stay quiet." He led Duke deeper into the rocks, Elena following close behind, her hand clutching the back of his coat. The boulders formed a kind of maze, passages winding between them in unpredictable directions. Zachary chose his path by instinct, heading generally south and west, away from the approaching riders. Behind them he heard voices calling out, the words indistinct but the tone clear. They knew someone was in the rocks. They were coming in after them. Zachary found a narrow crevice between 2 large boulders and pushed Elena into it, then squeezed in beside her with Duke's reins still in his hand. The space was barely wide enough for both of them, forcing them to press together, her heart hammering against his chest. He could feel her fear, could smell it on her skin mixed with the scent of his soap and the herbs from the tea. The voices were closer now, echoing strangely off the rock faces. Zachary eased his pistol from its holster, the metal cold against his palm. He had no desire to shoot anyone, but he would if it meant protecting Elena. A shadow fell across the opening of their hiding place. Zachary held his breath, his finger on the trigger, as one of the riders passed within 10 feet of them. The man was older, maybe 40, with a hard face and cold eyes that swept the rocks methodically. "See anything?" Another voice called. "Not yet, but they are in here somewhere. Tracks lead right in." "Henry wants her alive," a third voice said. "But if she is with someone, he does not care what happens to them." Elena made a small, choked sound, and Zachary squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. The rider passed by without seeing them, his attention focused elsewhere. They waited, pressed together in the narrow space as the men searched the rocks. It felt like hours but was probably only minutes before the voices began to fade, moving away toward the eastern edge of the boulder field. "I think they went around," one of the men said. "Come on, we are wasting time here." The sound of hoofbeats resumed, growing fainter as the riders moved on. Zachary waited until he could not hear them anymore before easing out of the crevice, Elena right behind him. "They will realize they lost the trail soon enough," he said quietly. "We need to put as much distance between us and them as we can." Elena nodded, her face pale but composed. "They said Henry wants me alive. That means he knows I am out here, that I am with someone. Probably spotted Duke's tracks mixed with your footprints near where I found you." Zachary helped her back into the saddle, then mounted behind her this time so he could keep his gun hand-free. "How many men does your husband have working for him?" "Maybe 15 on the ranch. Most of them are just cowboys, but a few are hired guns. Men he uses when he needs something done outside the law." She twisted to look at him, her eyes troubled. "Zachary, you cannot fight all of them. Maybe you should leave me here and go. You could still get away." "We have been through this," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "I am not leaving you. Now hold on." He urged Duke into as fast a pace as the snow would allow, heading southwest now instead of straight south. If Henry's men were searching for them, it was better to be unpredictable to avoid the obvious routes. They rode hard for the rest of the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horse and share what little water they had left. The sun was setting when they finally spotted a small ranch house in the distance, smoke rising from its chimney. "What do you think?" Eleanor asked. "Can we trust them?" Zachary studied the place carefully. It was a modest operation, a single house and a small barn, a few cattle visible in a nearby pasture. The kind of place run by a family barely scraping by, not the sort to be in Henry Thompson's pocket. "We need water and supplies," he said. "And Duke needs rest. It is a risk, but we do not have many options." They approached slowly, Zachary calling out when they were still a good distance away so as not to spook anyone. A man emerged from the house, a rifle cradled casually in his arms, his weathered face cautious but not hostile. "Help you folks?" he asked. "We are traveling south and got caught in the storm," Zachary said, which was true enough. "Hoped you might spare some water and maybe a bit of food. I can pay." The man's eyes moved from Zachary to Eleanor, taking in her oversized clothes and exhausted appearance. Something in his expression softened. "Come on up to the house. Name is John Miller. My wife will get you something warm to drink." They dismounted and followed John inside, where a woman in her 40s was stirring something in a pot over the stove. She took one look at Eleanor and immediately began fussing, pulling out a chair and pushing her into it, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Lord have mercy, child, you look half dead," she said. "John, get them some coffee, and bring that stew pot over here." Within minutes, Zachary and Eleanor were seated at the simple wooden table, bowls of hot stew in front of them and cups of strong coffee warming their hands. It was the best thing Zachary had tasted in months, and from the way Eleanor was eating, she felt the same. John and his wife, Mary, watched them with open curiosity but did not press for details. It was part of the code of the West, not asking questions that might not want answering. But when they had finished eating and Mary was pouring second cups of coffee, John finally spoke. "You folks running from something." Zachary and Eleanor exchanged glances. Finally, Eleanor said, "My husband, he is not a good man." Mary made a small sound of understanding. "I see, and you," she looked at Zachary. "I am helping her get somewhere safe." "Decent of you," John said. "Lot of men would not get involved." "Are you from around here?" Zachary asked. "Do you know a rancher named Henry Thompson?" The effect of the name was immediate. John's face went hard and Mary actually took a step back from the table. "Know of him," John said carefully. "Has a spread north of Vulture City. Rich, powerful, mean as a snake." "Why, he is my husband," Eleanor said quietly. "I ran away. He has men out looking for me. We saw 3 of them today following our trail." Mary sat down heavily in the nearest chair. "Oh, honey, you are in serious trouble. Henry Thompson owns half the territory, or might as well. Sheriff, judges, most of the merchants in Vulture City all owe him money or favors. Which is why we are heading south," Zachary said. "Trying to get her to a stage line, get her out of Arizona." John shook his head slowly. "If Thompson wants her found, he will find her. The man has resources most of us cannot imagine, and he does not forgive anyone who crosses him." "I know," Eleanor said, her voice small. "I am sorry. We should not have come here. If he finds out you helped us, he might come after you too." "Now you just settle down," Mary said firmly. "We are not turning you away, but you need to be smart about this. You cannot outrun Henry Thompson, so you need to outsmart him." "How do we do that?" Zachary asked. John thought for a moment. "There is a freight wagon heading to Tucson tomorrow, stopping at my place to pick up some cattle. Driver is a friend of mine, good man, and he owes me a favor. I could get you on that wagon, hidden among the cargo. Thompson's men would be looking for 2 people on horseback, not a freight wagon." "That could work," Zachary said slowly. "What do you think?" He looked at Eleanor. "I think it is the best chance we are going to get," she said. They spent the night at the Miller Ranch, Eleanor sleeping in a small spare room while Zachary bedded down in the barn with Duke. It felt strange to be separated from her after 2 days of constant proximity, and he found himself listening for sounds from the house, making sure she was safe even though logically he knew she was fine. He was beginning to realize that his feelings for Eleanor went deeper than simple chivalry or a desire to help someone in need. Somewhere in the past 2 days, between bathing her fevered face and holding her close on Duke's back, he had started to care about her in a way that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with the way her eyes lit up when she smiled, the courage he saw in her every day, the softness of her voice when she said his name. It was too soon, too fast, too complicated. She was running from one man. She did not need another one falling for her before she had even caught her breath. But knowing that did not change how he felt. He was still awake when Duke suddenly raised his head, ears pricked forward, and a moment later Zachary heard it too. Horses approaching, moving fast. He was on his feet instantly, grabbing his rifle and moving to the barn door. In the moonlight, he could see riders coming up the road to the house, maybe 6 or 7 of them. They were not trying to be quiet. Zachary ran to the house and burst through the door. Riders coming, at least 6. John was already up, pulling on his boots. Mary appeared in the hallway in her nightgown, and behind her Eleanor, her face white. "Henry," she asked. "I do not know, but we need to assume so." John grabbed his rifle from above the door. "Mary, take Eleanor out the back. Head for the canyon, hide there." "What about you?" Mary asked. "I will deal with these men. Now go." But it was already too late. The riders had reached the house, surrounding it on all sides. Zachary heard the unmistakable sound of rifles being cocked. "John Miller," a voice called out. "We know you have them in there. Send out the woman and we will leave peaceful. Nobody needs to get hurt." John looked at Zachary, who shook his head grimly. There was no way he was letting Eleanor walk out that door. "There is nobody here but me and my wife," John called back. "You boys have the wrong place." "We followed their tracks right to your door," the voice said. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be, Miller. Henry Thompson is not a man you want to cross." "I do not care who Henry Thompson is," John said, his voice hard. "This is my land and you are trespassing. You all turn around and ride out of here or I will start shooting." There was a long, tense silence. Then the voice said, "Have it your way." The first bullet shattered the window beside the door, glass exploding inward. Mary screamed and John grabbed her, pulling her away from the window. Zachary pushed Eleanor behind him and returned fire, his shot punching a hole in the darkness outside. "Back room now," he shouted to Eleanor and Mary. "Get down and stay down." More gunfire erupted, bullets tearing through the walls of the small house. Zachary and John took positions on opposite sides of the main room, firing out through the shattered windows. Zachary could see the muzzle flashes from the attackers' guns, could hear them calling to each other as they moved around the house. This was not a fight they could win. They were outnumbered and pinned down, and it was only a matter of time before one of those bullets found its mark. He needed to change the dynamics, create an opportunity for Alina to escape. "Cover me," he said to John, and before the older man could respond, Zachary was moving, running low through the door and into the darkness outside. He hit the ground rolling as bullets kicked up dirt around him, came up firing at the nearest rider. The man cried out and fell from his horse. Zachary kept moving, using the darkness and chaos as cover, working his way around toward where Duke was stabled in the barn. A rider spotted him and charged, raising his rifle. Zachary dropped to one knee and fired, watched the man tumble backward out of his saddle. But there were more coming, and his rifle was empty. He dropped it and pulled his pistol, backing toward the barn. He made it inside just as more bullets chewed into the wooden walls. Duke was dancing nervously in his stall, eyes rolling white. Zachary grabbed the saddle and threw it onto the horse's back, working with desperate speed. Outside, the gunfire had intensified. He could hear John still shooting from the house, could hear the attackers coordinating their assault. They were going to rush the house any second now, and when they did, they would find Alina. He had to draw them away. Zachary cinched the saddle tight and swung up onto Duke's back, then charged out of the barn at a gallop, firing his pistol in the air and shouting. The effect was immediate. Half the riders turned toward him, giving chase as he raced away from the house into the darkness. Duke was fast, but he was also carrying a full day's riding in his legs. The pursuit was close, too close, bullets whizzing past Zachary's head. He leaned low over the horse's neck, urging him faster, leading the riders away from the house and Alina. He did not know the terrain, could barely see in the darkness. When Duke's hoof found a hole and the horse went down, it happened so fast Zachary barely had time to kick free of the stirrups. He hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs, and rolled to a stop against a rock. Dazed, he tried to stand, but his leg gave out under him. Sprained or broken, he could not tell. He raised his pistol as the riders surrounded him, but there were too many. Someone kicked the gun from his hand, and then they were dragging him to his feet, rough hands holding him upright. A man rode forward, older than the others, with a cruel mouth and cold eyes. He looked Zachary up and down with obvious contempt. "You must be the fool helping my wife," he said, and Zachary knew without being told that this was Henry Thompson. "Where is she?" Zachary said nothing, just stared at him with all the defiance he could muster. Thompson nodded to one of his men, who hit Zachary hard across the face. Pain exploded through his jaw and he tasted blood. "Where is Alina?" Thompson asked again. "Go to hell," Zachary said. This time the blow was to his ribs, a brutal punch that made him double over gasping. Thompson dismounted and walked over, grabbing Zachary by the hair and forcing his head up. "Listen carefully," he said softly. "I am going to find her. The only question is how much you suffer before I do, so I will ask you one more time. Where is my wife?" Zachary looked him in the eye and said nothing. Thompson smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Zachary had ever seen. "Boys, take him back to the house. Let us see if watching this man die will loosen Alina's tongue." They threw Zachary over a saddle like a sack of grain and headed back toward the Miller ranch. Zachary's mind raced, trying to think of some way out of this, some way to protect Alina. But his leg was useless, his weapons were gone, and he was surrounded by armed men. He had never felt so helpless. When they reached the house, the scene that greeted them made Zachary's heart sink. John Miller was on the ground outside, blood spreading from a wound in his shoulder. Mary knelt beside him, crying, and standing in the doorway, her face set with determination, was Alina. "Let them go, Henry," she said, her voice steady despite the fear Zachary could see in her eyes. "This is between you and me. These people were just trying to help." Thompson walked toward her slowly, like a cat approaching a cornered mouse. "Oh, Eleanor, did you really think you could run from me? That I would just let you go? I am not your property," she said. "You are exactly my property. I bought you, I own you, and when I am done with you, I will decide when and how you die." He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to make her cry out. "Now we are going home, and you are going to regret ever thinking you could defy me." "No," Eleanor said, and there was something in her voice that made Thompson pause. "I would rather die right here than go back with you." She had a knife in her hand, Zachary realized, one she must have taken from the miller's kitchen. She held it to her own throat, the blade pressed against her skin hard enough to draw a thin line of blood. "You take one step closer, and I swear to God I will end it right here," she said. "You want me dead, Henry? Fine. But it will be by my own hand, not yours." Thompson's face went dark with rage. "You would not dare. Try me." For a long moment they stood frozen, locked in a battle of wills. Then Thompson's hand moved toward his gun, and everything happened at once. Eleanor pressed the knife harder against her throat. Mary threw herself at Thompson, clawing at his face. And Zachary, acting on pure instinct and adrenaline, twisted free from the men holding him and launched himself forward despite his injured leg. He hit Thompson in a tackle that sent them both crashing to the ground. The gun went flying from Thompson's hand, and Zachary got his hands around the man's throat, squeezing with all his strength. Thompson bucked beneath him, trying to throw him off, but Zachary held on with grim determination. Then someone hit him from behind, and the world went dark. When Zachary woke, he was lying on something soft. He opened his eyes slowly, his head pounding, and found himself staring at an unfamiliar ceiling. For a moment he could not remember where he was or what had happened. Then it all came rushing back. The fight. Thompson. Eleanor with a knife to her throat. He sat up too quickly and the room spun. Hands pressed against his shoulders, easing him back down. "Easy," Eleanor said. "You have a concussion. You need to rest." He turned his head and found her sitting beside him, her face pale but whole and unhurt. Relief flooded through him so intensely it made him dizzy. "You are alive," he said stupidly. "So are you, thanks to the sheriff." "The sheriff?" "Not Thompson's sheriff," a new voice said. Zachary looked past Eleanor to see a man in his 50s wearing a badge, his expression kind but serious. "Tom Bradley, territorial marshal out of Tucson. I got word a few weeks ago that Henry Thompson might be involved in some illegal land deals, came up to investigate. Heard shots when I was riding past the Miller place last night and found quite the scene." "Thompson?" Zachary asked. "In custody along with his men. Turns out when we searched his ranch, we found evidence of fraud, theft, and 2 bodies buried on his property. Women who had the misfortune to catch his eye. He will hang for sure." Zachary closed his eyes, letting that sink in. It was over. Eleanor was safe. Thompson would never hurt anyone again. "How long was I out?" he asked. "A day and a half," Eleanor said. "You have been drifting in and out. The doctor said you need rest." "Duke is fine. John is taking good care of him. John is fine too, by the way. The bullet wound was not serious." Zachary looked at Eleanor, really looked at her. There were dark circles under her eyes, and he would bet she had not slept much in the past day and a half. But there was also something else in her expression, something softer and warmer that made his heart skip. "You stayed," he said. "Of course I stayed. You saved my life, Zachary, multiple times. Did you think I would just leave you? You are free now. You could go anywhere. I know." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. "But I would like to stay here with you if you want that too." Zachary stared at her, afraid to believe what he was hearing. Alina, you have been through hell. You do not have to decide anything right now. Take time, figure out what you really want. I know what I want, she said firmly. I want a life I choose for myself, and I choose you, Zachary Lawson. If you will have me. He reached up with his free hand and cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheek. Are you sure? You barely know me. I know you risked your life for a stranger. I know you are kind and brave and decent. I know that when I look at you, I feel safe for the first time in 3 years. That seems like enough to build on. I am not rich, he warned. I am just a prospector with a claim that probably will not pay out. I cannot give you the life Thompson could. I do not want that life. I want a simple life with a good man. I want to wake up without being afraid. I want to build something real, something honest. Her eyes searched his face. Can you give me that? Yes, Zachary said without hesitation. I can give you that. He pulled her down and kissed her, gentle and careful, mindful of his injuries and her past trauma. But she kissed him back with a passion that surprised him, her hand coming up to tangle in his hair, and for a moment the rest of the world fell away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alina rested her forehead against his. I love you, she whispered. I know it is too soon and too fast, but I do. You brought me back from the edge of death and gave me a reason to live. I love you. I love you too, Zachary said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Have since the moment you stumbled into my camp. She laughed, the sound pure and joyful, and kissed him again. The marshal cleared his throat from the doorway, reminding them they were not alone. I will just go check on the Millers, he said with a knowing smile, and left them to their privacy. Zachary spent another 3 days recovering at the Miller ranch before the doctor would let him travel. Alina stayed by his side the whole time, reading to him, bringing him meals, holding his hand while he slept. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their lives, their hopes and dreams, building the foundation of something that felt permanent and real. When he was finally well enough to leave, they made their goodbyes to the Millers, promising to stay in touch. Mary hugged Alina tightly and whispered something in her ear that made Alina blush and smile. John shook Zachary's hand and said, You take care of that girl. She is special. I know, Zachary said. I will. They rode south together on Duke, Alina sitting in front of Zachary this time, leaning back against his chest. The weather had cleared, the sun bright and warm despite it being late November. The snow was already melting, turning the desert into a patchwork of white and brown. Where are we going? Alina asked. Tucson to start. I need to file paperwork to officially abandon my claim. Then I thought maybe we could head to California. I hear there is good land to be had for farming in the Central Valley. You want to be a farmer? My father was a farmer. A good one before the bank took it all away. I always thought maybe I could do it better, do it right. He rested his chin on top of her head. But only if that is something you want too. I want whatever gives us a life together, Alina said simply. Farm, ranch, mining claim, it does not matter to me as long as I am with you. They were married by a territorial judge in Tucson 3 weeks later, with Marshal Bradley standing as witness. Alina wore a simple blue dress bought with money Zachary had saved from his prospecting, and she had never looked more beautiful. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed her with all the love and promise of their future, and she kissed him back just as fiercely. They spent their wedding night in a small hotel room, and Zachary was infinitely patient and gentle, knowing she needed time to heal from what Thompson had done to her. But Alina surprised him again with her resilience and strength, meeting his tenderness with a passion of her own. They made love slowly and carefully, learning each other's bodies, building trust and connection with every touch. Afterward, she lay in his arms, her head on his chest, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his skin. "I never thought I could feel like this," she said quietly. "Safe and loved and free all at the same time. You will feel like this every day for the rest of your life," Zachary promised. "I will make sure of it." She tilted her head up to look at him, her green eyes soft in the lamplight. "You brought me back from death, Zachary. 3 days of fever and cold and fear, and you never gave up on me." "Never could have," he said. "From the moment you fell into my camp, you were mine to protect, and now I am yours to love." "And mine to love," he agreed, sealing it with a kiss. They left Tucson in early December, traveling west toward California with everything they owned packed on Duke's back, and a wagon they had bought with the last of Zachary's savings. The journey took weeks, following the southern route through the desert and then up through the mountains. It was hard traveling, but they were together, and that made all the difference. Alina proved herself to be stronger and more capable than even Zachary had guessed. She could shoot, cook over an open fire, raid the weather, and doctor both horses and humans. She had learned all of it running Thompson's ranch, skills he had never valued, but that served them well now. By the time they reached the Central Valley of California in late January of 1882, they were a true team, each knowing the other's strengths and covering their weaknesses. They found a piece of land near Fresno, good soil watered by the Kings River, and filed a claim with the land office. The first year was brutal. They lived in a tent while Zachary built a small cabin, working from dawn to dusk clearing land and planting their first crop. Money was tight, food was scarce, and there were times Zachary wondered if they would make it. But Alina never complained, never wavered. She worked beside him in the fields, her hands growing calloused and strong, her face tanned by the sun. At night, they would fall into bed exhausted, but always took time to hold each other, to whisper words of love and encouragement. Those moments sustained them through the hardest times, reminding them why they were building this life together. Their first crop was wheat, and when it came in that first fall, golden and heavy in the fields, they both cried with relief and joy. It was not a fortune, but it was enough. Enough to buy supplies for another year, enough to expand their land, enough to prove they could do this. By their second anniversary, the cabin had grown to 4 rooms, and they had planted an orchard in addition to the wheat fields. They had chickens and 2 milk cows, a vegetable garden that Alina tended with fierce pride, and neighbors who had become friends. And Alina was pregnant. She told him on a warm evening in September, her hand resting on her still flat stomach, her eyes bright with happiness and a little fear. "Are you ready to be a father?" she asked. Zachary swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "I have been ready since the day I married you," he said. "We are going to have a baby." "We are going to have a baby," she agreed, and they held each other close, marveling at this new chapter beginning. Their son was born in May of 1884, a healthy boy with Zachary's dark hair and Alina's green eyes. They named him Thomas, after Marshall Bradley, who had saved them both that terrible night at the Miller Ranch. Zachary held his son for the first time with hands that shook, overwhelmed by the weight of this tiny life depending on him. Alina watched from the bed, tired but glowing, and said, "You are going to be a wonderful father." "I am going to try," Zachary said. He brought the baby to her, settling him in her arms, and sat beside them on the bed. "Look at him, Alina. Look at what we made together." "Our miracle baby," she said softly, "born from love instead of fear." Zachary kissed her forehead, then his son's, his heart so full he thought it might burst. "I love you both more than I can say." Thomas was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Grace, and then another son they called James. The farm prospered. Their children grew healthy and strong. and life settled into a rhythm of work and family and simple contentment. On quiet evenings when the children were in bed and they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Alina would sometimes rest her head on Zachary's shoulder and say, "Do you ever think about that night, when I stumbled into your camp?" "Every day," Zachary would reply. "Best thing that ever happened to me. I was half dead, frozen and delirious, and I spent 3 days bringing you back, worth every second." She would smile then and take his hand, lacing their fingers together. "You did more than bring me back from the cold, Zachary. You brought me back to life, gave me a reason to live again. You did the same for me," he would say. "I just did not know I was lost until you found me." They grew old together on that farm, their children growing up and having children of their own, the land they had carved from nothing becoming a legacy for future generations. Through all the years, through drought and flood, good times and bad, they held fast to each other and the love that had begun in those desperate days in the Arizona desert. Zachary never forgot the sight of Alina collapsing into his camp that November night, more dead than alive, her eyes wild with fever and fear. But he also never forgot the moment she had looked at him with clear eyes and chosen him, chosen the life they would build together. That choice, made in the aftermath of trauma and pain, had been the foundation of everything good in his life. When they were very old, their children grown and their grandchildren running wild through the orchards they had planted, Alina would sometimes ask him, "Do you regret it? Taking in a strange woman that night, your life would have been simpler without me." And Zachary would always give the same answer, pulling her close and kissing her white hair. "My life would have been empty without you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Alina Lawson. From that first night until my last breath, you have been my everything." She would smile then, that same smile that had captured his heart all those years ago, and say, "I love you, Zachary." "I love you too," he would reply, "always and forever." They died within months of each other in the spring of 1923, Zachary at 78 and Alina at 75, having lived full lives rich with love and family and purpose. Their children buried them side by side on a hill overlooking the farm, under a spreading oak tree they had planted together in their first year there. The headstone reads simply, "Zachary Lawson and Alina Thompson Lawson, together in life, together in death, together in love always." And if you listened carefully on quiet evenings, some said you could hear their laughter still echoing through the orchards, the sound of two souls who had found each other against all odds and held on tight, building something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. A love story that began with 3 desperate days in the frozen desert and lasted a lifetime, proving that sometimes the most broken among us are capable of the deepest love. Their grandchildren would tell the story to their children, and they to theirs, the tale of how their family began with a frozen woman stumbling into a cowboy's camp, and the man who spent 3 days bringing her back, not just from the edge of death, but into a life full of love and joy and hope. It became legend in their family, a reminder that kindness and courage could transform lives, that love could bloom even in the harshest conditions, and that sometimes the greatest treasures come stumbling into our lives when we least expect them. The farm still stands today, now worked by the 5th generation of Lawsons, and in the main house, there hangs an old photograph of Zachary and Alina from their 50th wedding anniversary. They sit together on that same porch, his arm around her shoulders, her hand in his, both of them smiling with the contentment of people who have lived well and loved deeply. And if you ask any Lawson about their ancestors, they will tell you with pride about the night everything changed, about the cowboy who could have turned away but chose to help, about the woman who had the courage to run, and then the courage to love again, about 3 days that became a lifetime, and about a love so strong it still echoes through the generations. That is the legacy they left behind. Not wealth or fame, but the simple, profound truth that love can heal even the deepest wounds, that kindness matters, and that sometimes the stranger who stumbles into your life is actually the answer to a prayer you did not know you were praying. From that frozen November night in 1881 to the peaceful spring afternoon in 1923, when they drew their last breaths surrounded by family, Zachary and Alina Lawson lived a love story that proved the best things in life are worth fighting for, worth building, worth cherishing every single day. And so their story ends, not with tragedy or sorrow, but with the peaceful completion of a life well lived together, a love that conquered fear and built something lasting, and a legacy that continues on in the laughter of children playing in orchards planted by hands long gone but never forgotten. They had found each other in the darkness and cold, and together they had created warmth and light that would shine on for generations to come.